You think explaining yourself makes you mature. You think clarifying your intentions makes you strong. You think defending your choices makes you respected. But in most power structures, social, professional, political, constant explanation does not signal intelligence. It signals insecurity. And insecurity is leverage. Listen carefully. The moment you feel the urge to explain yourself excessively, something inside you is afraid. Afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being disliked, afraid of losing approval, afraid of losing position. And Machiavelli understood something brutal about human nature. The one who seeks approval surrenders authority. You were trained to believe that being transparent earns trust. That if someone questions you, you should calmly explain your reasoning. That if someone misunderstands you, you should correct them. That if someone doubts you, you should defend your name. But here is the darker truth. When you explain yourself repeatedly, you position the other person as judge. And once someone feels like your judge, the hierarchy shifts. They evaluate. You justify. They question. You clarify. They doubt. You defend. That is not equality. That is submission disguised as maturity. Machiavelli observed royal courts filled with intelligent men who destroyed their own power not through betrayal, but through over-clarification. A ruler who constantly explained his decisions trained his court to question him more. Because explanation creates expectation. If you explain once, they expect explanation again. If you justify once, they expect justification again. Soon, silence from you feels suspicious. Now you are no longer leading. You are maintaining perception. And maintaining perception is exhausting. Power does not beg to be understood. It moves. It decides. It enforces. It does not pause every 5 minutes to reassure observers. Think about the most powerful figures you have seen in your life. Did they explain every choice? Did they rush to correct every rumor? Did they defend themselves against every whisper? No. They allowed ambiguity. And ambiguity creates caution. The more you explain yourself, the more data you give away. Your motives, your fears, your emotional triggers, your pressure points. Every explanation reveals what matters to you. And what matters to you can be used against you. Machiavelli knew that people test limits. If someone questions your decision and you immediately rush to justify it, they learn something. They learn that doubt unsettles you, so they doubt more. If someone criticizes you and you respond with a long defense, they learn something else. They learn that criticism moves you, so they criticize more. Reaction teaches people how to control you. Silence confuses them. Now, understand something important. This is not about arrogance. This is not about ignoring accountability. This is about strategic restraint. There is a difference between clarifying once and over-explaining repeatedly. Weakness is not speaking. Weakness is speaking because you cannot tolerate discomfort. Let's go deeper. Why do people feel the need to explain themselves? Because they fear misinterpretation. But misinterpretation is not always a threat. Sometimes, misinterpretation filters weak observers out of your circle. If someone misunderstands you once and walks away, were they aligned with you to begin with? Or were they attached to a version of you that required constant reassurance? Machiavelli warned that it is better to be respected than loved if one cannot be both. Love requires explanation. Respect requires consistency. Consistency is quiet. If you are consistent in behavior, you do not need endless clarification. People eventually learn your pattern. And pattern builds authority. Now let's address something uncomfortable. Explaining yourself often comes from guilt. You say no, then you explain. You set a boundary, then you justify. You make a decision, then you soften it with reasons. Why? Because you are afraid that someone might see you as selfish, so you rush to prove you are not. But the moment you rush to prove your virtue, You reveal that your self-image depends on external validation, and that dependence can be exploited. Machiavelli observed flatterers carefully, not because praise was evil, but because praise creates vulnerability. If someone can make you feel morally superior by calling you kind, you will work to protect that identity. And protecting identity often means over-explaining when it is threatened. Never explain yourself when your decision is clear. State it. Pause. Let the silence sit. Most people rush to fill silence because they cannot tolerate tension. If you can tolerate it, you win the moment. Here is the psychological shift you must understand. When someone questions you and you explain immediately, you lower your status. When someone questions you and you answer briefly without emotional tone, you maintain status. When someone questions you and you refuse to justify unnecessarily, you elevate status. Because you signal certainty. Certainty intimidates. Hesitation invites challenge. Machiavelli survived political chaos not because he was loud, but because he was controlled. He did not waste words clarifying himself to every critic. He observed, he acted, he conserved. Words are currency. Spend them carefully. The more you speak to defend your image, the more you drain authority. Silence makes people work harder to understand you, and effort increases perceived value. Let me show you something darker. When you explain yourself excessively, manipulative people learn your logic. They study it. They find gaps. They weaponize your own reasoning against you. If you justify a boundary with emotional reasoning, they will challenge the emotion. If you justify a decision with logic, they will debate the logic. But if you state the boundary without over-explaining, there is nothing to attack. I've decided. That doesn't work for me, no. These are powerful statements, not because they are loud, but because they are final. Finality creates stability. Instability invites negotiation. Most people live in negotiation mode. They negotiate their time. They negotiate their boundaries. They negotiate their self-worth. And then they wonder why they are not respected. Respect grows around firmness. Firmness does not apologize for existing. Machiavelli understood that authority weakens when it becomes overly accessible. If everyone can demand an explanation from you at any time, you are not leading. You are reporting. And reporting is not power. Power answers when necessary, not when pressured. Now let's talk about social dynamics. Imagine you make a decision in a group setting. Someone says, "Why did you choose that?" You have two options. Option 1, you begin explaining in detail. You justify your reasoning. You try to make sure everyone understands your logic. Option 2, you respond calmly because it aligns with our goal and you move on. In the first option, you invite debate. In the second option, you close it. Most people think debate proves intelligence. In reality, constant debate often proves insecurity. Secure people do not need to win every argument. They need to maintain position. Machiavelli's hidden truth is this: power is not about being right. It is about being unshakable. And over-explaining is shaking. You feel it in your body. The need to correct, the need to clarify, the need to be understood. That need is emotional dependency. And emotional dependency signals weakness to those who know how to look for it. Now I will tell you something that will disturb you. Sometimes, people intentionally misunderstand you to force you into explanation. They misframe your words. They exaggerate your tone. They accuse you of things you did not mean. Why? Because they want you defensive. Defensive people give information. Information is leverage. The moment you realize someone is baiting you into explanation, you must detach, calmly, without visible irritation. Because visible irritation confirms impact. Machiavelli observed that appearing unaffected is often more powerful than appearing correct. Correctness satisfies ego. Unbothered stability protects position. You must decide which matters more. Let's go even deeper. Explaining yourself often signals that you believe the other person's perception determines your worth. But your worth is not up for vote. If you behave consistently over time, those who are aligned will understand. Those who are not will drift away. That is not loss. That is filtration. Filtration strengthens circles. Over-explaining weakens them. Part 2 will go deeper into when you should speak, when silence becomes dangerous, and how to combine brevity with calculated dominance. Because this philosophy must be applied strategically, not emotionally. But remember this before we continue. The moment you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily, people begin adjusting their tone around you. And that is where real power begins. Now we go further. Because there is a mistake many people make when they first hear this philosophy. They confuse silence with coldness. They think never explaining yourself means becoming distant, harsh, unapproachable. That is not power. That is immaturity. Machiavelli did not advocate reckless silence. He advocated calculated communication. You do not explain yourself when the explanation serves ego protection. You do explain when the explanation serves strategic clarity. The difference is subtle. If your explanation strengthens structure, speak. If your explanation only protects your image, remain silent. This requires self-awareness. Ask yourself, am I speaking to improve the outcome, or am I speaking to avoid discomfort? If it is discomfort, remain quiet. Discomfort builds resilience. Every time you resist the urge to over-explain, you train your nervous system to tolerate tension. Tension tolerance is rare. Rare traits create authority. Now let's talk about romantic relationships. This is where most people fail. They over-explain boundaries. They over-justify decisions. They over-clarify feelings. And slowly attraction fades. Why? Because certainty fades. Attraction is tied to emotional stability. If every small misunderstanding turns into a long emotional clarification session, the dynamic shifts. You become reactive. Reaction lowers perceived strength. Strength is not dominance. It is calm consistency. If someone constantly demands explanation for your tone, your time, your choices, and you comply every time, you train them to monitor you. Monitoring is not love. It is control. Machiavelli would say this clearly. Never allow someone to feel entitled to constant access to your internal reasoning. Mystery sustains intrigue. Overexposure dissolves it. But again, balance matters. Refusing to communicate important things creates distance. Over-communicating trivial things creates weakness. You must learn to distinguish between essential clarity and emotional reassurance. Emotional reassurance should be given sparingly, not because you are cruel, but because it must retain value. If reassurance is constant, it becomes expectation. Expectation becomes demand. Demand becomes pressure. Pressure erodes power. In professional environments, the same rule applies. A leader who constantly explains decisions to avoid discomfort eventually loses authority. Employees begin to test. Peers begin to challenge. Subordinates begin to question tone instead of direction, because they sense negotiability. Negotiability signals softness. Softness invites escalation. Firm brevity discourages it. Let's talk about rumors. When someone spreads misinformation about you, your instinct is to correct it, to defend yourself publicly, to prove innocence. But often, loud defense amplifies the rumor. Silence suffocates it. Why? Because gossip requires energy. If you refuse to feed it, it weakens. Of course, if a rumor threatens structural damage, you address it once, clearly, calmly, without emotional display, and then you stop. Repetition lowers authority. The more you repeat your defense, the more it sounds like doubt. Certainty speaks once. Insecurity repeats. Machiavelli understood that repetition is often a symptom of fear. If you are sure, you do not repeat. Now consider this. When you explain yourself excessively, You train people to expect access to your inner world. And once they expect it, they feel entitled to it. Entitlement is dangerous, because once someone feels entitled to your thoughts, they begin evaluating them. Evaluation leads to judgment. Judgment leads to pressure. Pressure leads to compromise. And compromise without strategy leads to erosion. You must protect your mental space. Not everyone deserves explanation. Not everyone deserves clarity. Some deserve boundaries. And boundaries do not require essays. They require firmness. I've made my decision. That's not open for discussion. This is what works for me. Simple, stable, final. Notice how uncomfortable that feels if you are used to over-explaining. That discomfort is growth. Growth feels like loss of control before it feels like strength. Machiavelli would not waste energy convincing someone who has already decided to misunderstand him. He would reposition, recalculate, and act. Action carries more weight than explanation. Now let's confront the deepest fear. What if they think badly of me? They will. Someone always will. If your peace depends on universal approval, you will always be explaining yourself, and you will never rest. Peace comes from internal certainty. Internal certainty reduces external justification. You must build an identity that does not collapse under misinterpretation. This does not mean ignoring feedback. It means filtering it. Feedback that improves structure is valuable. Feedback that merely questions your character without evidence is noise. Noise does not require explanation. Noise requires distance. In the end, the philosophy is simple but difficult. Speak less, mean more, justify rarely, decide firmly, allow silence to carry weight. Because when you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily, people begin to think twice before questioning you casually. They begin to measure their words. They begin to hesitate. And hesitation is the beginning of respect. If this shifted how you see communication, subscribe for more deep breakdowns of power, psychology, and strategy inspired by Machiavelli's mindset. Comment below, do you over-explain, or have you learned to tolerate silence? And share this with someone who needs to understand that sometimes. The strongest statement is no explanation at all.